Hi, I'm David Mooter, Senior Analyst from Forrester, and the title of this presentation is Treating Events as Products, the Convergence of EDA and APIs. Now, before I get into that convergence, I like to frame a lot of my presentations about speed versus agility. Speed is going fast when you know your destination, whereas agility can be thought of as going fast when you don't know your destination. In other words, the ability to rapidly change directions. This is key. And the past few years have been so representative of this. You think about shutdowns from the pandemic, supply chain disruptions, inflation, war in Europe, sanctions. I mean, it's been nothing but craziness the past few years. The organizations that can rapidly change directions have thrived, and those that could not have suffered. And this implies you need an architecture that enables that business agility. We see this in our survey data. We ask which of the following are true about the application architectures and strategies used by your enterprise. And there are multiple answers you can choose, but I want to focus in on two of them here. These are the two that had the most growth going from 2020 to our 2021 survey. The first is we have a major focus on event-driven architecture. The key word there is a major focus, not just we're doing EDA. And secondly, as a general principle, we look for architecture strategies and designs that foster business agility over and above technical agility. And you can see here from now you can see the 2021 data side by side with 2020. Those are pretty significant jumps. The agility one, architecture that fosters business agility, jumped the most of all the responses, and the major focus on EDA jumped the second highest following that one. Now, we view at Forrester that the pillars of solution architecture for agility are where you run things, that would be your container and cloud platforms, but more central is how you build things. And those would be APIs, events, microservices, and integrations, such as iPaaS. These all interplay in different ways. For this presentation, though, I will be focusing primarily on, actually exclusively on APIs and events. Now, the value proposition of APIs is modular business transformation. You start out with these various business strategic objectives, such as excellent customer experience, streamlined business ops, and so forth. You have various business capabilities out there, such as issue card money transfer, that you expose as an API. And these APIs then become a platform. Basically, your enterprise becomes a platform that your strategic objectives can plug into. And the key point here is you don't see the word application on this slide. It's not the issue card and money transfer app. It's the issue card and money transfer business capabilities. Now, hopefully this is not new for most of you, but events also enable modular business transformation. When someone calls a money transfer API to initiate a money transfer or a trade API to execute a trade, the outcome of that transfer or that trade is interesting. That's an event. There are other systems and clients who need to subscribe to those things. And what this leads into is what Forrester calls digital bonding. REST has dominated for integration and for the digital business. But the challenge is if your digital strategy consists of nothing but REST, the constraints of REST become the constraints on your business strategy. And so organizations find they need to look beyond REST. And the goal as you think about your integration patterns is what is the right pattern to connect me as a provider organization with my customers, partners, and so forth. And like I said, REST has dominated and will continue to dominate, but other patterns are gaining steam. Based on my inquiry data, it seems to me that events are growing the fastest. Also some uptake in GraphQL, but certainly events, from my experience, seems to overshadow all the other alternatives to REST. Now, at a high level, your architecture may look something like you see on the screen here. This is domain-driven design. If you're not familiar with that, go look it up. But the sense here is that you have different business domains and you align your IT systems to those business domains. Inside the domain, there may be various microservices, as shown here as the blue boxes. And the communication between those domains is typically through REST via API management, maybe some asynchronous calls to publish some data to your analytic stores and so forth. What we see evolving here is that communication between domains often needs to be an asynchronous push rather than asynchronous pull. That means events become as important as APIs for these interdomain communications. And just as you want to manage the APIs on that domain boundary, you also want to manage the events. And so that means API management expands beyond just REST and into what I call domain boundary management. Now, some might argue an event is just an asynchronous API. I think that's actually the right mindset, but I call it domain boundary management because many people in our industry, when they think APIs, are just thinking REST. Now let's review the EDA maturity model from Forrester. And this will, I think, help really illustrate how that convergence of API management into going beyond APIs into events is occurring. We have 2 high-level stages and 4 lower-level stages. The first 2 are tactical, are more IT focused. Initially, it's isolated use where it's more of a coding pattern, maybe not really architecture. There's no central guidance. And frequently you're using it because you have to. For example, serverless, function as a service, Amazon Lambda, you have to be event driven in that. But then as it gets used, IT begins to see the value. Architecture teams begin to see the value. Oops. And as awareness grows across the IT organization, then the architecture team may standardize on 1 or more brokers. Architectural patterns emerge and become documented for reuse. And EDA is being used intentionally for IT agility and more innovation. Now, in my mind, the interesting stage happens when you move to govern, the first of the strategic phases. This is when we start focusing EDA on improving business outcomes. At this stage, the importance of events is elevated to the level of APIs. Doesn't mean you have the same number of event streams as REST APIs. Maybe you have 100 REST APIs and 5 event streams, but those 5 events are just as important as those 100 REST endpoints. A governance team establishes standards and oversights for your events. A discovery portal makes your event streams, well, discoverable. You're focusing on business enablement by unsiloing data and establishing enterprise insights. And the 4th stage is transformative, where events and APIs are transforming your business strategy and are being used as building blocks and for platform business models and ecosystems. Now, where is the market today? Well, based on my inquiries, Forrester clients want to transition to governed. The majority of my inquiries on event-driven architecture are, I put them in 2 buckets. The first one would be, we're in the standardizing phase. We see the value in elevating with the same importance of APIs, but we're just not sure if that makes sense. Are other organizations doing that? Is this a good idea? And I talk through, well, yes, that is a good idea. You're on the right track. Second one is kind of similar. We're in the standardizing phase. We've already made the decision to move to governed. Maybe we've made a few steps, and we want to talk through what's the path to get there. Are we thinking about the right things? Transformative is more of a prediction. I haven't seen or haven't talked to an organization where I would say they are all the way there. There is one organization, a bank I saw at a tech conference that seemed to be there, but it was at a conference. I wasn't able to have a one-on-one conversation. And I have talked to 1 or 2 other organizations that are, I would say, partway there. They understand this transformative vision, and it's their goal in the next year or so to get all the way there. And so as you mature towards that, you need to think about how you're going to mature IT and business to support digital products. Maybe you start out with ad hoc point-to-point APIs, change data capture is kind of a primitive eventing system. You have API gateway, brokerless functions as a service, very much a project mindset. Maybe you now, as a secondary phase, you've established an enablement center for EDA and APIs, you've established standards and governance, portal, a design-first mindset, and IT-driven design. And eventually, events and APIs are embedded into business culture, taking a product mindset, which is key, looking at measurable business objectives, federated delivery, and design driven by end users rather than by IT. Now, this is just an example path. The point I want to drive here is that you need to think about where are you today, where you want to be in the future, and what are the intermediary stages to get there. That might look different than what I have on the screen here, but think about that for what fits in your organization. The product mindset, though, I do want to call out, is particularly important. If you want to, and this is one of the main reasons I see digital initiatives fail, is that we want to embrace digital, but we're not treating them as products for customers driven by end user value. We're still thinking of it as an IT integration method. I'll talk more about that later. So here are some key things you need to do to move forward in the maturity of event-driven architecture, and also basically applying the best practices of APIs to events. So one of them is outside-in design for your APIs and also your events. So here there's an API interface. On the right, you see the definition of that interface. And around the interface are the user and the implementation. Now the question is, which of these two should drive the design of that definition? Many organizations start with the API implementation. Maybe we want to build an order fulfillment API and we use SAP. So we build an API that looks a lot like SAP. That's not the right approach, and that's not bashing SAP. It's a great system. The point is that your end users don't care if you have an SAP API. They care you have an order fulfillment API. And so looking at the end user's need, that should drive your API design. That's outside-in design. Similarly, you have outside-in event definition. You have your broker. You have the definition of the event you see on the right. Outside the broker, you have the publisher and the consumer. And again, the design of that event should be designed with the value you're delivering to the consumers of that event. Another thing is what is the right way to think about API and event management? Remember what I said about API management expanding beyond just APIs and also into managing events? Well, a wrong way to think about API management is security first. Now, security is important. I don't want anybody hearing this webinar to say, Forrester says security is not important. That is not my message here. Security is very important. But when you think about API management and your strategy, that is not your first concern. And this is also true of event management. Your primary concern should be how you think about the relationship between you and the consumers of your events and your APIs. That puts the portal front and center. Yes, security is important, but you either really put thought into the portal. If you don't put thought into the portal and discoverability and that the feedback from end users, then you will not be able to deliver events and APIs that transform your business and create digital business models. Also, organizations struggle with governance. This is a very common challenge. Different assets need different levels of governance. One size does not fit all. How do you distinguish which assets need what level of governance? Well, one way, a very important way, is to have a taxonomy. A taxonomy should be based on not the implementation. It should be based on things like, well, like you see here, what are the major usage scenarios and delivery channels? What type of event or API is this? Is it a low-level change data capture event? Is it a high-level business event? Is it a low-level infrastructure API, or is it an API that represents a business capability? Data classification. Is there PII and GDPR data flowing through this asset? And maybe also the business function or domain that owns this particular event stream or API. These kinds of taxonomies that can then drive your governance. If I have GDPR data, I should govern that more. If I don't, I should govern it less. If this is part of a business building block, part of my digital strategy, I should govern it more. If it's some low-level CDC event or change or infrastructure API, I should govern that less. And that taxonomy can help you tailor fit the right level of governance per asset. Also, centralized governance doesn't scale. So what you see here is a governance team on the bottom and a team of developers, several teams of developers on the top that are delivering events and APIs. And in a centralized model, the governance team defines the governance standards, reviews projects, and enforces those standards. Then the developers, they implement per standards, then they bring the APIs and events to the governance team for approval. Now, the problem is that governance team becomes a bottleneck. As projects enter through that governance bottleneck, other ones stack up. There's just not enough throughput. In other words, it doesn't scale. And so organizations need to embrace decentralized governance. Now, some organizations say, we'll just throw governance out the window. But again, if your digital strategy is REST and events, and you don't govern them, you have ungoverned business strategy, which is a terrible idea. And so decentralizing or federating your governance helps create more innovation agility. Your governance team at the bottom defines the standards, sometimes approves exceptions. The developers are implementing, they attest to compliance, they inform the governance team of exceptions. When I say sometimes approve exceptions, when it comes to deal breakers like security, you probably want the governance team centrally approving those exceptions. But there may be ones where if the development team makes the wrong decision, it's very easy to recover from that. There's really not much value in the governance team approving those exceptions. Also, the life cycle of your APIs and events, it can be the same. I don't want to prescribe a life cycle here. That's why I just said stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fill in your own stages. But I have seen organizations where they have an API life cycle, and as they embraced event-driven architecture, again, elevating to the same level of importance as APIs, they're like, yeah, the life cycle is really the same as APIs. There doesn't need to be much of a difference. So let's wrap this up. Forrester recommendations. Expand API management into events. Treat events and APIs as digital products. Use outside-in design. And make both of them discoverable via a portal. Number 2, unified API and event taxonomy. The taxonomy should come from its role in the business and the architecture. And you should tailor governance based on that taxonomy, not one size fits all. And lastly, unified API and event lifecycle and governance. You should govern APIs and events together. That means that the team that establishes the governance standards should really be the same team, and embrace a federated governance model. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening, and that concludes my presentation.